There's a question asked on Reddit, what was the most supernatural event in your life that you can't explain? Some of them were quite bizarre. The other ones were maybe you can consider comforting. I'm sure that you can find some way to explain some of these. I'll let you make that decision. And also when it comes to Reddit, you always have the ability to comment on every story given. Some of these I found quite funny. So I'm going to go ahead and share some of those with you. So without further ado, let's get started. The night before Thanksgiving 3 years ago, I was across the country with my parents. We was driving back to their house with my now wife to my friend's house. As we were drawing near, there seemed to be a bundle of some type in the middle of the road. Well, I stopped and we pulled off to move it. It turned out to be a barred owl. It got clipped by a car. Long story short, I spent the rest of the night trying to get the owl into a puppy cage. We gave it some food and water, and the next day we dropped it off at a wildlife rescue center. I got home the next week. It was all the way across country from New Jersey to Oregon. I stepped outside, and there was a barred owl sitting on a fence just watching me. It was gone by the time I got back, but now I know that I'm straight with all the owls. One comment said, "When the owls rise up, and they will, you will be okay." Another comment was talking for the owls. One of them said, "Hey, I visited a guy who saved you. I got a close look at him. I didn't want to accidentally shoot him when we took over the world." Maybe this is just another way that Matt Groening has predicted the future. Because if you noticed in Futurama, there was a huge owl infestation if you watch the series. It's pretty good. It's actually my favorite of all of his animations. This didn't happen to me, but a very nice old guy and his wife used to live a few streets over from us. Well, she got very sick, and he went there to help take care of her and watch over her. Well, a few weeks later, she moved into hospice care and later died. The night she died, her husband and son drove back home, and they were talking about what to do for the funeral. Then the husband asked, "So do you think that you would want this one person to attend?" And they both said that they heard the dead mom say from the back seat, "No thank you." Man, she must have really hated that person. One person actually said that was a really polite burn from a ghost. I have no idea what happened, but I cannot definitely say how it happened. My father died back in 2000. He was at their home at the time. I was over one night and it was pretty late. My mother had gone to sleep. I swear that I could feel my father's presence. I was sitting in the very spot where he died. They believed he had a heart attack, that when he tried to get off the couch to go call for help, he just collapsed and died. I was on the very couch where this happened. Anyways, I thought to myself, well, this is stupid. People don't leave their essences behind. I'm not feeling anything. So I say out loud, "If this is really you, Dad, knock a box of cereal off the shelf on the floor." I wanted to pick something I didn't think would happen, especially by accident. I went into the kitchen and I watched the shelf. Well, I was there for a few minutes and nothing happened. Since it was almost midnight, I decided to sleep in my old bedroom. I woke up the next morning and went downstairs. The box of cereal was laying on the floor. I saw my mother and I asked, "Did you knock the cereal onto the floor?" She said no, that she had just woken up. So what happened? However, my mom had a cat. I guess the cat did it, but I don't know for sure. If she gotten up on the shelf, everything would have been knocked around. Everything else was in its normal position. Just the one box of cereal on the floor. I mean, regardless, it might have been the cat, right? Later, my mom told me, months before this happened, she felt Father getting into bed. And this was one night after he died. She just said out loud, "Go away, Greg, you're dead. You don't need to go to bed anymore." And she said she felt him get out of bed, which is kind of weird. The thing is, my mother despised my father by the end of his life, though they did remain married. So it wasn't really surprising that she told him to get out. When my son was 4 years old, he was able to name my grandmother by name, only by her picture. This was a picture from when she was in her 20s. This picture was in storage, that my mom was going through. Well, my grandmother died before my wife and I met. Well, my son, 4 years old, said that this lady taught him how to silly laugh. As context, his silly laugh, as he called it, was a laugh that sounded just like my grandmother's. The reason why it was so specific and silly was that my grandmother had a brain aneurysm, which paralyzed the left side of her face and her body. This included her vocal cords. It gave her a very distinct and odd-sounding laugh. Another comment said that they were in the same position as the son, except his grandmother was a jerk and would yell at him for something.
Hey, you're so skinny you need to eat. Are you telling your mother that you need more food? Also, when are you going to give me some grandchildren?
Grandma, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. Go back to your eternal sleep. I faced 3 different instances where I avoided getting hit by an SUV. This all happened because my shoelaces were untied. This was all within a span of 6 weeks. At the time, I was 19 years old. I guess the guardian angel was working overtime. The author ends up buying slip-on shoes. Guardian angel says, "Oh, for heck's sake." When I was young, I had a family dog. That dog was basically my best friend. She was my protector and everything until the day she died. Well, when I was a little kid, according to my parents, we suddenly stopped what we were doing. Both of our heads snapped up, and we were looking in the same direction at the stairs. Well, my dog walked in front of me and started growling, which was very unlike her. Then our eyes would trace something that was coming down the stairs, and then all of a sudden, like it just vanished. We just both returned to what we were doing, rolling around on the floor like a bunch of idiots, or whatever toddlers and dogs do. That used to scare the crap out of my parents. One night I had a dream about my grandpa. He died almost 20 years prior. I was in his home, and he kept telling me, "Oh, we need to clean the house. We gotta get the house ready." When I asked him why, he just said, "She's coming home." Now my grandmother, his wife of 50 years, died the very next day. He was a very, very sweet, stubborn old man. My grandma would constantly go after him about making messes and tracking mud into the house, which makes this dream all the more legit. "Harold, you had 20 goddamn years to clean the house." "I'm working on it, Marge." "Christ!" Christ walks in. "Yes, my son." Laugh track ensues. A clod of red earth fell from above, and it hit our windshield of the car. This was several years ago. The dust took several dozens of spraying it with the windshield wiper fluid and wiping it to make it go away. Well, it almost caused us to crash. It was dark out, and once our view was restored, we could see a dancing dog. He was in the middle of the road. He was illuminated by the headlights. He was facing our car, swaying side to side on his back legs. It was as if we were watching a rocking horse, going from side to side, stiff legs and everything. It seemed wholly unnatural, like nothing I've ever seen before. Well, we decided to floor it in reverse, and we kept driving backwards until he was out of sight. We were absolutely terrified. I was about 15 years old, and I was trying to sleep, but I was having an asthma attack. Late in the night, I started hearing a rhythmic breathing. It was coming from the floor next to my bed. It wasn't scary, it was more comforting, and it wasn't me, because my breathing sounded way more messed up than that. It helped me calm down, and I got to sleep. Even though I was still sick, I was able to get my hands on an inhaler in the morning. At the time, I thought it was a friendly ghost. I later rationalized that maybe I was hearing a family member through the heating ducts. What I realized years later, when I had a dog, was it sounded exactly like a big dog sleeping next to the bed. So now I'm 50-50 on whether it was a ghost dog that came and visited me, or maybe it was my own dog who came back in time, about 10 years before she was born to comfort me. Sounds exactly like the thing a dog would do if they could time travel. Time Dog, coming this summer, starring Dwayne Johnson and Nicolas Cage as Time Dog.
We're more like treasure protectors.
The only way I can explain this one is wishful thinking. My mom and dad were codependent, and they liked it that way. They didn't want other people, other than their kids. They were completely happy with just the two of them. They were completely wrapped up in each other. My dad died a day before his birthday, and he was in the hospice care center. Afterwards, it was like he was still home. His touch lamp beside his recliner would go on by itself. The recliner, it would rock like someone was still in it. And sometimes, my mom and my sister would hear my dad saying something like, "Hey honey, fix me a cold drink." And that's exactly how he would say it. That way that my mom would fill up the massive jug of Sprite that she would put over ice. My mother died less than a year later. After my mother died, there was never another sign of either one of them still being there. They've been gone now for close to 14 years. When I was going to my family's home, I got into an SUV going down the road. This was in Bangladesh, and after taking the SUV, we would be on a highway for the next 2 hours, going down a forest. I'm sitting shotgun when an old man walking down the highway flags us down. He was hitchhiking, and the driver decided to pick him up. Well, this man insisted on sitting in my seat. Well, I obliged, because he was an older man. About an hour down the drive, our car collided with a bus. It hit directly at the shotgun seat, and it was mangled up severely. We all got out, and we looked around, but we couldn't find the old man, the one that insisted on taking the seat. He was nowhere to be found. Stories like these aren't rare, but I just didn't believe them. We all know the man sat in that seat, and we all saw him, but he was nowhere to be found. He just vanished. No blood, nothing. He was wearing ethnic attire, which isn't peculiar around the area. He didn't speak at all. We didn't ask him anything either. He just said to drop him off at the market ahead, which would actually be in the town that my house was in. The one thing that was weird was that he spoke with the same dialect of someone from the 1800s. Now, when I said he didn't speak at all, I meant during the ride. He didn't say of anything else except for where he wanted to go and insisting on my seat. One person commented, "This made me mad for some reason. Imagine a hitchhiker begging for a ride only to demand shotgun. I'd be like, F you. Then I would have been killed by a bus." My granddad died when I was 7, but per his own words, I was his absolute favorite, partially because I was a spitting image of his mother. Even into adulthood, I looked very much like her. When I was 21, I was set to give birth to my first son. I was about to get into the elevator for labor and delivery when a man came in saying that he was a volunteer and that he would help me and my husband find our way. The elevator was slow, but we spent the time talking about the blessings of children and how they grow up so fast. Here's the thing. He looked and sounded exactly like my granddad. Same stature, same blue-gray eyes, same faint Scottish-Canadian accent, same khakis, checkered shirt, and a sky blue cardigan. Even spookier is that the nurses said that they didn't have any older men who was volunteering in that particular building. I don't really believe in ghosts, but I actually feel absolutely certain that my granddad paid me a visit that very night. I have quite a few actually, but this one, the one that happened pretty recently, stands out. I grew up in a very rural area, mostly crops, farms everywhere. About a mile from my parents' home, there's this old abandoned farmhouse. All the kids in the area said it was haunted. They would sneak into the house after dark. All the typical stupid kid crap. But I believe there were things that were better left alone. so I never went. Years pass. The house fell into disrepair, and eventually it was torn down, leaving an old weathered barn. Well, I was making a little side money, selling photos of abandoned places, so I wanted to take pictures of the barn. I parked on the road and was walking up the drive. I made it about 10 feet. Before I couldn't walk any further, my feet wouldn't move. My adrenaline just spiked and I burst into tears. So I turned back to run to my car. I didn't feel safe. That was until I passed a nearby creek that I had to go over to get there. I let it go, but a few months later, we had to drive past the property again. After having the Christmas dinner with my parents, there was a creature standing in the drive. It reminded me of the fawn from Pan's Labyrinth. Super tall, and it had a white head with horns or antlers or something, and his eyes were more like on the side of his head. Again, my adrenaline kicked in, and I burst into tears, but I was trying to keep it together because I didn't want to freak out my kids. My husband asked if I was okay. I just said, "You saw that, right?" "Yup." "Was that human?" "Nope." I refused to drive that road ever again. I was working as night security for a small office. This was at a sanitation plant. The building had a single entrance. Everyone had to check in at security at that station, either to get in or to go out. Well, a worker shows up and checks in, saying that he needed to take care of a few things and to grab some stuff. So I check his ID, and I flip on a few lights for him, and I go about my business. Fast forward a few hours, and my shift's about to end. I still haven't seen this guy come back. So I go patrol the building to find him, and I literally can't find him anywhere. He's not in any of the areas where the lights turned on. No other lights are on, and he's not in any other rooms. I stopped by security to see if I had just missed him, or someone else let him leave, but no one was there. I do a second patrol, still no signs. At this point, I went to check out the cameras to see if he went. But he's not on any camera, except for the one covering the entrance in the security station. He turns down a hallway and never shows up again. At this point, I logged the incident, and I got out of there. The next day, my boss calls me up, and he says the worker has been on vacation out of state for several days, and that he wouldn't return for several more. Nobody could offer any explanation as to what happened. We checked the cameras, and sure enough, he was on the cameras. But apparently he was out of town when this happened. Imagine finally having a decent out-of-body experience where you end up at work instead of like a tropical beach. Poor man. He astral planed right into work while on vacation. That's some awesome job dedication right there. Had a dream once about a high school best friend. She moved out of state and started a family. I hadn't seen her or spoken to her in like 10 years. I never met her child except for in pictures or posts on Facebook. In my dream, I was walking down a street at night, and out of nowhere a little girl appears. I ask her, "Where's your mama? Why are you by yourself?" I remember her taking me to some bushes near a random house, and on that street I find my friend, and she's in bad shape. She was beaten up or something. On the ground, I remember running to the door of a random house, screaming for help and to call the police. This is all I can recall from the dream. The next day I woke up, and I think to myself, man, that was weird. Maybe I dreamt about her because seeing her recently on Facebook or commenting, I thought I should send her a message. But I go about my day, and I don't give it another thought. That was until later. When I got home and sat on my couch, I scrolled through Facebook, and bam, 1,000 posts saying rest in peace, etc. All of them tagged my friend and her daughter. I thought, what the fuck? At this point, there was no information about what happened, so I thought maybe it was a car accident or something. But over the course of the next few weeks to a month, more and more information came out. It was not an accident. My friend and her sweet baby had been murdered by some animal. It wasn't literally an animal, it was actually a person, but I don't really like referring to them as a person. This happened about 5 years ago. I still remember the main parts of my dream vividly. I'm still a little bit horrified that I had this dream that very night. This was possibly when it was happening. I haven't been able to tell anyone about this because just thinking about it gives me chills. When I was a kid, around 10 or 12 years old, I was carrying a load of laundry upstairs at my home. I was alone at the time. My mom was out doing errands. We have this weird carpet runner on the stairs, which are hardwood. They really were only attached at the very top of the flight of stairs. They weren't really secured or fitted. So naturally the steps have like air bubbles or other places where it would slip. Well, since I had the laundry, my vision was obscured. I start to fall backwards and I'm bear hugging the bunch of blankets. I specifically remember thinking, well, I guess I'm gonna die. While almost airborne with just one big toe on the carpet, I felt two hands, one on either side of my shoulder blades, give me a firm shove back. It launched me back up the stairs and right up against the stair rail. I assumed that Mom was somehow silently came in behind me early from doing her errands without announcing herself there. So I turned around to thank her while I was still clinging to the rail, but no one was there. I scurried up the stairs and put my things down while calling her name and walking around the house trying to find her. I checked and all the doors were locked and her car wasn't home. I finally resorted to calling her cell phone, and she told me that she was hitting up a few more stores. Now every time I go up the stairs, I still feel like there's a presence in the stairwell, like someone's watching over us, like in a very protective way and not sinister. I went with my brother to see an old family property. My mother inherited a property in a very rural area. We were just looking about. It hadn't been lived in decades. There was a bit of wind and it was a rainy day. Both me and my brother were inspecting the house until we started hearing weird rhythmic knocking coming from around the building, like just knocks in regular intervals. Much like a clock sounds, but a lot louder. We stepped out and looked around, but the noise started sounding like it was getting a bit further away from us. Then it just disappeared. We left shortly afterwards. A couple of days went by, and I stopped by my mother's. I asked her if she had any pictures of the original owner of the house, which turned out to be my grandfather. So my great-grandfather. She pulled it out, and guess what? The man had a wooden leg. This was as a result of a war injury. I told my mother about it, and it was like she was remembering him. She said that that's exactly how it sounded when he walked on the porch. That was weird. Be it could have been some other animals or creatures, but I still can't shake the feeling that it was probably him. This was early into my relationship with my wife. I had a dream about her childbirth. It was very vivid and long, like I spent days in the hospital with her, and everything was strange and in twilight. When it came time to the delivery, things went very wrong, and her and the baby ended up passing away. I woke up and I was quite shook up, but I brushed it off. I am a nurse, and I've had to deal with traumatic OBs before. I chalked it up with dealing with that kind of stress in my dream. 6 years later, my wife is pregnant. I'd forgotten about the dream by now. I get a call late in the third trimester. This was while I was on my shift. My wife was being taken to the ER for a bad BP. I get off my shift and I go to meet her. As soon as I step into the room, I remember my dream. It's the same damn room. This was pretty spooky because this hospital wasn't even built when I had my dream. This was the last year before lockdown started. My wife is admitted, and they wanted to wait for a week to deliver if possible. So she went into a twilight state until it was that time. So it's me in this room eerily isolated as the world around us is frozen, and my wife is incoherent, only mere feet away from me. Lingering for days in this room, I brushed off my dream, trying to manage my anxiety and stress. It comes showtime, and my wife begins to push. And it's exactly the same scenario that I had in my dream. Things started going poorly, but the doctor thinks that delivery should still be possible. But at this point, I'm finally starting to freak out and go into full panic. I demand a C-section for my wife. The doctor, I can tell, wants to argue, but I think my outburst made her step back. She makes the call for an emergency C-section. It took about 10 minutes for me to get taken back. And as I'm in the OR, I see my baby come out, and she's completely lifeless. They do everything they can to resuscitate her. In the meantime, my wife is doing very poorly, and they're scrambling to control the bleeding. I follow the baby out, knowing there's really nothing that I can do. The baby gets life flighted to another hospital, but before I can go, I see my wife is stable and headed to the ICU. Both my wife and baby were critical but alive. Today, they are both thriving. And my baby is 16 months old, just like a tornado of energy. I don't think they would have been alive if not for that dream, which caused me to freak out and demand a C-section, which in all likelihood, if it wouldn't have happened, they wouldn't have made it. I had a phase in my mid-teens when I would read the obituaries in the local newspaper. I saw a name that was familiar, as it was the same name as a family friend. They had the full name. First, middle, and last name. I didn't say anything to my parents since I figured they already knew. A few days later, my mom told me that he died, and I said I knew since I saw the obituary. She said, no. He died last night in his sleep. I went back through the newspaper. My mom would keep them for a week before throwing them out, but the obituary wasn't there. And the odd thing, when the real obituary came out, they only had his first name and last name, with just the middle initial. This was almost 40 years ago, and I still think about it. Thank you very much for joining me for this edition of The Creeper. Hope you guys enjoyed the little change up there. Add some of the comments at the end. I thought it'd be nice to add something a little bit funny and humorous in with some of the serious. It's a nice change of pace. But hopefully, some of you have dark humor like I do and appreciated it. Thank you again for joining me. I want to give a special thanks to my patrons. Your help is greatly appreciated. And please keep those comments coming. It means a lot to me. As this is only a hobby, it's really nice and motivating to be able to hear y'all's comments and seeing how it actually helps out. It also helps me out too. I want to give a shout out to one of my viewers, and I'm going to do this just for old time's sake. Again, thank you for listening, and this is Dallas. And just remember, have fun with your failures, or they'll have fun with you.